In this program, you will learn about the battles at the Alamo and Goliad and the Mexican War, and how these events resulted in the American expansion to the Pacific. You will meet Stephen Austin, head of the Texas colony, as well as legends of Texas, Jim Bowie and Sam Houston. And you will encounter the Napoleon of the West, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who fought to hold and defend Mexico's Texas territory. In 1800, Spain controlled the land that is now known as the country of Mexico. Back then, Mexico included the whole of what is now the state of Texas. When the United States signed the Florida Purchase Treaty in 1819, it gave up any claim to Texas, but many Americans still wanted to move there. Texas had rich soil, which was well suited to cotton growing. Cotton was the most important crop in the South at that time. Texas also featured vast herds of cattle and had the potential to become a center of trade.
Moses Austin was a businessman from the East Coast, and he approached the Spanish government with a proposal to allow him to sell land in the Texas territory. The Spanish government agreed, and Moses Austin became the first American with the rights to legally settle and sell land in Texas. Unfortunately, Moses Austin died very shortly after finishing the agreement with the Spanish, so his son Stephen took over as head of the Texas colony.
Stephen Austin was the first and most successful of the American impresarios, men licensed to advertise and sell land to settlers. Austin recruited 300 American families to his new Texas colony, but just as they arrived, trouble arose in the land.
No sooner does Stephen F. Austin bring the first of his colonists to settle on the banks of the Brazos River, does he find that there has been a revolution in Mexico City. In 1821, Mexico declares its independence from Spain, just like the United States had in 1776 declared its independence from Great Britain. Mexico was no longer a colony of Spain. Mexico is now an independent republic. The question in Austin's mind, and indeed in the minds of all of the American colonists, is the new Mexican government going to honor the deal Moses had made with the old Spanish government? Well, there's only one way to find out. Austin has to mount his horse and make the long, arduous overland journey to Mexico City.
Austin's trip to Mexico City was a success. The new Mexican government also agreed to let Austin settlers bring slaves to Texas, receiving 80 acres of land for each slave they brought. By 1825, 1,800 people lived in Austin's colony, 443 of them slaves of African and Caribbean descent. The Americans were expected to accept and abide by Mexican law. Some did. Many others did not. There were many American squatters, people who settled upon land for which they had not paid and did not have permission to occupy. Some of these were criminals running away from the law or poor people trying to escape their debts in the U.S. The Mexicans looked down on them. Jose Maria Sanchez was a Mexican draftsman sent in 1828 by the Mexican government to survey the Texas province border with Louisiana. Sanchez came back with a very critical assessment of the American settlers. Mexico officially reversed its immigration policy, not allowing any more American settlers to come to Texas. The Mexicans also banned the further importation of slaves. They imposed heavy taxes on American goods, and they sent troops to the frontier to enforce the new laws. Nevertheless, Americans continued to stream into Texas. and tensions between the two sides increasingly turned into open hostility. Men who wanted Texas to break away from Mexico and join the United States unified into the War Party. It was from the ranks of these rebellious settlers that two legends of Texas emerged, Jim Bowie and Sam Houston.
By the time he came to Texas, Jim Bowie was already something of a legend up and down the Mississippi River. Born in Kentucky, he spent his boyhood in Louisiana, where he was said to have hunted bear and wrestled alligators. But as he grew to manhood, he got involved in some shady dealings. He was a land speculator, and that would have been fine, but he also seems to have had a career dealing in forged land certificates. So what we're talking about here is land fraud.
Sam Houston came to Texas to try to rebuild his shattered life. By the time he was 34, Houston had been a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and had become the youngest governor in the history of Tennessee. But Houston fell on personal and political hard times. He resigned his governorship in disgrace and moved to Texas in 1832, attempting to make money through land speculation. Instead, his fame was later to be made through his military and political service in Texas. Houston joined the War Party shortly after his arrival. The popularity of the War Party rose as the Mexicans became more oppressive in their rule. In 1833, Antonio López de Santa Anna was elected as the new president of Mexico. In 1835, Santa Anna took away all local rights for Texans. This moved the Texans and Mexico to the brink of war. Even former peacemaker Stephen Austin echoed the call for the colonists to take up arms against Mexico. Among those who responded to the call to battle the Mexicans was legendary frontier rifleman and Tennessee Congressman Davy Crockett. On October 2, 1835, fighting broke out at the Battle of Gonzales, and the Texas Revolution was underway. Santa Anna began the Goliad campaign to crush the rebellion. He sent General Martín Perfecto de Cas to lead an army of 800 to establish Mexican military posts at Refugio, Goliad, and San Antonio. In response, Stephen Austin went with a group of a few hundred, calling themselves the Army of the People, to surround Cas and his army in San Antonio. With Sam Houston, the Texans took the Mexican post at Goliad and then drove Cas and his army into the Alamo, an old Spanish Catholic mission in San Antonio. Cas surrendered. The Texans let the Mexican troops go and rejoiced in their triumph. The victory was short-lived. Santa Anna himself took command of the campaign in Texas, leading an army of nearly 6,000 troops. Sam Houston realized that there was little that could be done to stop Santa Anna from overtaking the forces at the Alamo. He sent Jim Bowie to destroy the Alamo before the Mexicans could use it to protect San Antonio. Instead of destroying it, Bowie tried to hold the Alamo, occupying it with a group that included Davy Crockett, William Travis, and other volunteer militiamen. On February 24, 1836, Santa Anna and his troops arrived at the Alamo and demanded surrender. In response, the Texans fired their weapons upon the Mexicans. The Mexican forces bombarded the mission with artillery fire for 13 days, until the fort was destroyed. On March 6th, the Mexicans climbed over the bombed-out walls and entered the barracks, killing every American in the Alamo, including Jim Bowie and Davy Crockett. On March 2, 1836, the Texans declared independence for Mexico. It was a gesture of defiance, much like the U.S. Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. Shortly after the Alamo siege, Santa Anna began his move to take Goliad. General Jose Herrera, under Santa Anna's command, marched up from the Matamoros up along the Texas coast towards the town of Goliad and the Goliad Fort, the Presidio La Bahia. This garrison was commanded by James Walker Fannin. Fannin was a very brave man, but unfortunately was not a strong military leader. He thought that his troops should retreat from Goliad, but he hesitated. Finally, Sam Houston ordered him to retreat, but he still delayed leaving. As he began his retreat northward to rendezvous with Houston on the Colorado River, it was already too late. On an open prairie between Goliad and Victoria, General Herrera's cavalry and Fannin and his men met and fought the Battle of Coleto. They were overwhelmed and forced to surrender. The garrison was marched back to Goliad. Under the direct orders of Santa Anna, the majority of Fannin's Goliad troops were marched out and shot. Santa Anna figured that the siege of the Alamo and the massacre at Goliad would crush the morale of the rebels. He was wrong. Instead, the losses only intensified the efforts of the people in the United States to help out the Texans. Remember the Alamo and remember Goliad became rallying battle cries for the Texas and U.S. rebellion. While the details of the Texas Constitution were being debated, Sam Houston retreated east with his army toward the Gulf Coast port of San Jacinto. It was there that he fought the decisive battle of the Texas Revolution.
Santa Anna actually assured the Texian success by separating himself, the commander of the army, from the main bulk of the army and going off with a very small detachment in an effort to capture the Texas government. Well, they didn't capture the Texas government, but they did place themselves in a position to be cut off by Sam Houston and his rebel army. And that army attacked on April the 21st, 1836.
When Santa Anna's troops stopped to rest, Houston and his troops were hiding nearby. Houston ordered a bridge behind the Mexican troops burned down so that neither the Texans nor the Mexicans could escape from the areas surrounded by water. Houston led the charge, and the Texan forces wiped out the Mexican forces, taking Santa Anna prisoner. The Mexican dictator was forced to sign a treaty acknowledging Texas as an independent republic and expanding its borders. As soon as Santa Anna was released, he and the Mexican legislature renounced the treaties as illegal and refused to acknowledge Texas sovereignty. They made no effort to reclaim Texas for fear of ending up in a war with the United States. Andrew Jackson recognized the independent Republic of Texas on his last day in office as President of the United States. Houston was elected as President of the Texas Republic. In September 1836, the people of Texas voted to ratify a constitution. Texas was now an independent country. However, few Texans actually wanted to remain independent. On their own, they were not strong enough to succeed as an independent country. Financial problems and battles with Indian and Mexican raiders quickly overwhelmed the Lone Star Republic. The vast majority of Texans, including Houston, wanted to join the United States. In 1837, Houston petitioned the United States government for entry into the Union. Obtaining statehood would not be easy for Texas. They wanted to join the Union as a slave state. Many members of Congress from the North were opposed to slavery and blocked any attempt to expand the number of states that allowed it. At the very least, they did not want the even balance between slave and free states in the Union to be tipped to the slaveholders' side.
The greatest issues in the presidential election of 1844 was the annexation of Texas. Is it going to happen? Is it not? The Whig candidate was Henry Clay. Now, he said that he was for the annexation of Texas unless it meant war with Mexico. Well, in this, he's not sincere because he knows the annexation of Texas will lead to war with Mexico, because Mexico has always said that the moment Texas joins the Union, there will be a declaration of war. So what he really means is that he's opposed to the annexation of Texas. On the other hand, the Democratic candidate, James Knox Polk, is forthright in his desire to bring Texas into the Union at any cost, even if it means war with Mexico.
Polk narrowly defeated Clay. Polk took his victory as an agreement and authorization from the American people to expand the country, whether by treaty or by war. Polk subscribed to a doctrine called Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny centered on the belief that the United States had been selected by God to spread their democratic institutions from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean.
There's a lot of confusion today among most Americans concerning what the term manifest destiny means. Well, in that time, manifest is just another word for obvious. It was America's obvious destiny to expand westward, to annex Texas, New Mexico, California. It was obvious to Americans. It was less obvious to Mexicans who said, this is, after all, our territory.
On December 29, 1845, Texas was officially admitted to American statehood as the 28th state of the Union. President Polk soon looked to the Pacific Northwest to expand the U.S. and was able to strike a deal with Britain to split the Oregon Territory, giving the U.S. land that includes present-day Oregon, Washington and Idaho, and parts of other states. Then he looked west of Texas and offered to buy the Southwest Territories from Mexico, but was refused. Polk was still determined to get the territory he wanted and decided to provoke a confrontation with Mexico in order to gain through war what could not be gained through diplomacy. In early 1846, Polk sent troops led by General Zachary Taylor to defend the disputed southwestern border between Texas and Mexico. Mexico took this as an act of aggression and broke off diplomatic relations. On April 25th, Mexican troops crossed the river and attacked a patrol of Taylor's soldiers, killing 16 men and wounding and capturing others. Mexicans had shed American blood upon the American soil. Although some dissenters like Henry Clay and Whig Congressman Abraham Lincoln questioned whether that soil was actually American, Congress overwhelmingly voted for war, initiating the Mexican War. What began as a border dispute between Texas and Mexico grew into a concerted effort to gain New Mexico and the Californias from Mexico. General Taylor led the effort to invade northeastern Mexico. Old Rough and Ready, as Taylor was nicknamed, found his forces outnumbered 20,000 to 5,000 in the northern Mexican town of Buena Vista. When he and his troops succeeded in beating back the Mexican troops, Taylor became the hero of Buena Vista. General Winfield Scott had the most difficult campaign of the entire war. Scott advanced his troops upon the ancient Aztec halls of Montezuma in Mexico's capital, Mexico City.
During the American campaign to capture what they call the so-called halls of Montezuma in Mexico City, the Americans assaulted the fort at Chapultepec in Mexico. At this fort, were training a bunch of soldiers who were just boys. Well, these boys ended up fighting alongside adults, fighting the Americans who were invading their country. Although the fort was captured, and it was basically meant that Mexico would, for all intents and purposes, lost the war at that point, the boys who fought there became great heroes of the Mexican people. They symbolized the bravery of the Mexican people, and that anybody can help out in battling the foreign powers.
Unlike Taylor and Scott, General Stephen Kearny's path to victory was relatively easy. He was able to take New Mexico and Santa Fe without a single casualty. Kearny then pushed on through San Diego and Los Angeles, gaining control of California from Mexico. The Mexicans were defeated. In February 1848, Polk's representative Nicholas Trist signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo with Mexico. The treaty cut Mexico in half, giving to the United States the land that includes all or part of the present-day states of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, Wyoming, and California. For this, the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million.
The Mexican War, or the War of Northern Imperialism, as they call it in Mexico, had an important and lasting effect on the nation of Mexico. Prior to this war, there wasn't a real sense of nationhood. They called themselves a United Mexico, but they really weren't. And it was the shame of this defeat that really forced Mexicans to come together, to forge a real sense of nationhood. It was a hard way to do it, but it was really the defeat and the solidarity that defeat brought to Mexico that forged a real sense of Mexican nationalism.
Most Americans were not at all concerned with the effect the war had on Mexico and the Mexican people. President James K. Polk's administration added more territory to the United States than had any since Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase. But the cost in human and political terms was immense. Texas became independent, and the Mexican War was won at the cost of substantial bloodshed on both sides. The acquisition of these new territories led to increasingly heated debates about the spread of slavery into new settlements. The rift between slave states in the South and free states in the North became more and more divisive during the 1850s.
The annexation of Texas led to the Mexican War. And then slavery becomes an issue again, because all these new territories that we got from Mexico, once again, are these territories going to be free or slave? And it's this issue, the question of the extension of slavery into the territories, that is ultimately going to lead to secession and war.
American settlers streamed to Texas for its rich soil, vast herds of cattle, and its potential to become a center of trade. When Mexico tried to shut off further American immigration, the tensions between the two sides increasingly turned into open hostility, and the settlers decided to break away from Mexico. On March 6, 1836, the Mexicans climbed over the bombed-out walls and entered the barracks, killing every American in the Alamo. Texas was officially admitted to American statehood on December 29, 1845, and the Mexican War was won at the cost of substantial bloodshed on both sides. President James K. Polk's administration added more territory to the United States than any other had since Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase.